أصحاب السعادة.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Assembly, may the peace of God be upon you. Excellency Jamal Sanad Suwaidi, Director of the ECSSR, would like to thank you for attending this lecture that will be held under the title of The Future of Collaborative Arab Action. This lecture comes in the framework of a series of lectures that will be organized by the ECSSR and where we will welcome an array of speakers, high-profile speakers, in the on the occasion of our 20th anniversary. In the framework of the changes that is witnessed by our Arab region and the effect on the Arab relations in many aspects that are anyways not stable, where we see sometimes a clear rapprochement and sometimes a lot of differences despite all the efforts deployed in order to reinforce our collaborative action, but the differences in our visions and especially towards the developments our world is witnessing makes our collaborative Arab work in the framework of the changes, especially the political ones, really related to the action taken and the role played by the institution and especially the Arab League in reinforcing this collaborative work in the Arab region. In order to answer all these questions and many others, we would like to welcome Dr. Nabil Elaraby, the Secretary General of the Arab League, who will give an extensive presentation about the collaborative Arab action. And he was appointed Secretary General in 2011. Before that, he was the Foreign Minister of Egypt. He graduated from Cairo University in 1955, and he got his master's degree in international law and doctorate PhD in law also from New York University in 1971. Dr. Nabil Elaraby was Egypt's ambassador to India between 1983 and 1981, and he was also appointed as a permanent representative of Egypt at the UN in Geneva between 1987 and 1991, and he worked also as a judge in the ICJ between 2001 and 2006, and he was a member of the he was a member in Law Commission in Geneva between 1994 and 2001. He also was appointed as the director of the Cairo Center, Regional Cairo Center for International Trade between 2008 and 2011. He headed also he was also considered as a consultant for the Egyptian delegation during Camp David Conference for Peace. He also gave lectures in many prestigious universities such as Columbia, New York, and Pennsylvania and Houston. I would like, ladies and gentlemen, to call upon Dr. Nabil Elaraby to take the floor and talk to us a little bit about the future of collaborative Arab action. Allow me at the outset to say that I asked to speak for 30 minutes. And I took the permission to speak while sitting because I don't like to speak while standing up. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jamal Sanad Suwaidi, Director of the ECSSR, I would like to extend to you my thanks for this invitation where you asked me to speak from my heart and to raise some issues pertaining to the challenges that are facing our Arab world nowadays. I would like to thank also Dr. Jamal Sanad Swedi and all those who work in the ECSSR and organize its activities. I would like to wish them and congratulate them for the 20th anniversary of the center. I would like also to express my greatest appreciation to the role played by the center in reinforcing the dialogue concerning some of the most important issues that are of importance to our region and the world. Ladies and gentlemen, before talking about the challenges faced by the Arab world in this very precarious situation, allow me to talk a little bit about the international order today. First of all, we would like to talk about the security order and also the gap between the law and the application of law, and also the phenomenon that we are witnessing today, which is the lack of force in the third world countries. As for the international order, after the World War II, the UN was created in order to save us from the atrocities of the war, where a lot of countries gave a part of their power in order to allow a new international order where the UN Security Council plays the most important role of preserving the security, and the Council was given the power to take actions in order to repress all the violations to world peace. However, sadly, day after day, we found out that this council was unable to be up to the level of the roles that were given to him because of the veto power given to 5 states, which meant that the contemporary international order failed to provide security and stability for the world. However, San Francisco Conference in 1945, we agreed, or the states agreed, that the charter needs to be implemented. However, despite all of this, the relations were still governed by power, and the international order was still based on the power and the double standards in dealing with many international issues. And the Arab world is a clear example for that. The history of the UN Security Council's dealing with the conflict in Palestine during 5 decades, and also the miserable situation in Syria now, where the entire world is suffering from its repercussions. We have another point that we need to raise. Many scholars don't take this into considerations, which is the gap, the huge gap between the rules of the international law, its principles, and the international agreements, and the implementation of such laws. And with the years, this gap is becoming deeper and deeper, leading to a chaos governing the whole world, and leading also to a lot of conflicts that are marginalizing the agreement that was signed in 1945. And to give you an example about that, there are certain rules who concern all of the things that we can witness in this world. We have rules pertaining to the outer space. We have rules, maritime rules, and we have rules for human rights. We have rules for disarmament. However, when it comes to the implementation of such rules and laws, there is no guarantee for its implementation. So in 1945, the ICJ was created. Today, we have 194 member countries in the ICJ. And I was, 5 years ago, I was honored to be a judge in the court. However, 70 countries only are abiding by the mandatory rules of the court, such as Egypt, for example. And Egypt only accepted that in terms of the Suez Canal and Constantinople Agreement, and also the management of the Suez Canal. There are a lot of countries who are imposing many conditions on accepting the rules. So the situation is different inside the countries, which means inside the country on the national level, if I was in disagreement with my neighbor, he can raise the matter to the court whether I like it or not. However, in the ICJ, we cannot raise a matter to the court unless both parties are in acceptance. So we are not living in the jungle anymore. However, we did not reach an international order that is strict and strong and then allows every country to be up to the expectations, up to their rules. This is non-existent today. Of course, it's sad. Moreover, we don't have an order that can guarantee the creation of an international mechanism for implementation. The international mechanism that is existent for all the international matters resides in the UN Security Council. And we all know that it is a political apparatus, and it is always subject to politics and subject to the will of the 5 permanent members. Any of these 5 countries can veto or obstruct any resolution. For example, if in the ICJ we have if we have a certain decision concerning a country A, this country A can raise the matter to the UN Security Council, where everything can be obstructed. So sadly, this is a phenomenon that we are witnessing on the international level, and we need to know that there is a huge difference between the international laws and its implementation. Moreover, there is a third phenomenon in the international relations, which is the weakness of the developing world's groups. Because in our contemporary world, and because of the global nature of many of the problems, similar or countries who have similar situations created groups in order to defend themselves and to create the hard lines for the international policy. That's why we had the non-alliance movement, where all the Arab countries were members, and it had a certain influence on the international relations in the 60s, 70s, and maybe in the 80s of the last century. And it used to take certain decisions in principle in terms of the international relations, and therefore it got its name, the conscience of the world. So also in 1960, there was the charter who ended colonialism, and among its principles or among its gaps is that it did not remove the colonialization. It created the Trustship Council, which was ended by the 1514 decision, where high-profile leaders such as Abdel Nasser, Sukarno, and a lot of names participated in the adoption of this law. So this was thanks to the non-alliance movement, and after the dismantling of the USSR, Yugoslavia, and a lot of Arab countries became weaker. Of course, we have the 77 group that includes 153 countries, but it only operates on the economic level, and it has no effect whatsoever on the international politics. Now I would like to talk a little bit about the major political challenges facing the Arab world. We are facing today in the Arab world, in light of the developments, a lot of challenges that came hand in hand with the creation of the Arab League. These challenges took different forms along the years. However, today we are feeling a lot of challenges caused or due to the Arab revolutions that were trying to make change in this part of the world. On the top of the list of the challenges is the Palestinian cause. It has always a priority not only on the Arab level, but also on the regional level, and on the level of our relations with many countries. Adding to that the continuing Israeli occupation has many repercussions, whether they are economic, strategic, moral, or legal, affecting the interests of everyone and challenging the powers that were accepted by the international order. All the countries who got their independence can do things that the Palestinian people cannot do. And sadly, we see that the international community and the UN Security Council, who is supposed to be responsible for that, is still looking at the matter of Palestine as in terms of management of a certain conflict and not in order to end it. The Arab worlds and countries discussed the matter in depth and reached a very important decision taken on 17 November 2012, which calls for pressuring the international community in order to end this conflict in a certain time frame and in agreement with the international agreements. This resolution was adopted on 17 of November 2012. I was appointed by the Council to open or to discuss this matter with the 5 permanent member states in the UN Security Council. Then, the American Secretary of State came last year in March and said very clearly that the US is in favor of ending this conflict in a certain time frame and the creation of a Palestinian state and adopting the two-state solution based on the international laws and agreements. And at the same time, the Palestinian state needs to be in connection, and he used in English the word, it needs not to be as a Swiss cheese full of holes. And based on this decision, the summit in Doha last year decided the launch of the negotiations before the President Mahmoud Abbas accepted to enter the negotiation under the patronage of the US. The negotiations continued for many months. Now, all I can say is that the US is asking for more time. And the US wants to take a certain step before reaching an agreement to adopt a framework. This framework, I don't think that the US did present it in its final version to the parties. However, they are discussing it, of course. And I think that before the next Arab League summit that will be held next month on the 25th, Israel and Palestine would have taken a deep look on this framework, and we will know what are their visions on this framework. All I can say now is that the UN thinks that the starting point needs to be the borders of 67, and that Jerusalem needs to be the capital of the Palestinian state. Of course, they did not specify what do they mean by Jerusalem, because all the international agreements talk about Eastern Jerusalem, and it is occupied, and so the Eastern Jerusalem needs to be the Palestinian capital. However, there are no assurances about that. They discussed also the borders of 1967 and whether there will be exchange of lands. And President Mahmoud Abbas said that in case this exchange will happen, we have three conditions. First, that the surface of the land need to be equal. Also, the value need to be equal, and in concession. So far, nothing happened. However, the President Mahmoud Abbas says that what is left of Palestine is only 22% of the historical Palestinian lands. And as you know, the decision to divide Palestine gave Palestinians, who used to be the large majority, only 44% of the Palestinian lands. Also, please allow me here to say that before this decision was adopted in 1978, three countries were there: the ambassador of Iraq, Syria, and Egypt. They were discussing the matter. After that, they found that this decision shouldn't be adopted, and they presented a draft resolution to the General Assembly to adopt or to get a consultation from the International Court of Justice. And as you know, the General Assembly and all the all the part of the UN that are operating this regard can take a consultation from the court. However, the question is, can the General Assembly adopt a certain decision despite the opinion of the majority? So the resolution was not adopted, and they gave 65% of the lands to the minority. And this what happened. So after Oslo, what was left was 22% of the Palestinian lands. And President Mahmoud Abbas insists that this percentage shouldn't decrease, and it should be based on the borders agreed.
The Palestinian Authority at that time agreed to engage into the negotiations based on the principles of the Arab Initiative, which was adopted in Beirut in 2002. The Arab Peace Initiative, which was adopted in Beirut in 2002, was adopted in every summit which took place after the Beirut summit. This initiative states that after the withdrawal of Israel from the occupied states and after the establishment of the state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as a capital, and after reaching a just solution for the refugees, after all of this, the Arab countries would accept to normalize their relations with Israel and not the opposite. because some sometimes try to say that the Arab states would start to normalize the relations so that Israel would withdraw from the Palestinian lands. However, the Arab states have made their point clear about that. Talking about non-obligatory or non-binding resolution with the United States may not be useful. For me, I think that it would be useful if the United States of America would be successful in exerting enough pressure on Israel. Some say that the United States of America will be in a better position after the November elections, which would be the last elections for the Congress and the Senate. And I think that Obama would have a wider margin for movement. At the same time, Israel is asking for requirements that weren't there before. Israel has signed peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan and signed the Oslo agreements. However, there are countries which were established on a religious basis, such as Pakistan, but Pakistan is not asking India to declare itself an Islamic state. So Burkina Faso, for example, filed an application to the Security Council to change its title from a normal republic to a religious republic. And also Egypt in 1971 requested to be named as the Arab Republic of Egypt. So there are always objectives behind these requests. And when it comes to the Palestinians, we know that there are a lot of Palestinians who are residing in Israel since 1948 and who have the Israeli nationality. Of course, the Palestinian leadership and President Mahmoud Abbas refused this. But I think that some opinions and ideas which are very complicated show a bad intention from the side of Israel. And I think that Israel has been doing this during all previous negotiations. What if this initiative fails? I can allow myself to ask this question. What if this active minister, Secretary of State, fails in achieving a solution to this problem? Of course, there's this traditional style which is always adopted to go to the UN Security Council, to international organizations, and to discuss this matter, or to try to hold in another international peace conference, because the last peace conference, which was held in December 1973, and there was no other peace conference held after this one. Maybe we would witness a similar conference again if the initiative fails. However, holding such conferences are still subject or depending on the acceptance of the United States of America. In this strategic center, I think that we can tackle other topics and matters. Are there any other options for Palestine, for the Arab states? For me, I think yes, there are other options. There are many other options that are available for Palestine. All of them are difficult options. However, there are doors who weren't knocked seriously until now. However, the objective of these tracks should be to oblige Israel to withdraw from the Palestinians' land, because the occupation of Israel is today the last hub of apartheid and colonization. I think this should be the field of focus. I think that many European states and the United States have launched a campaign which is to boycott sanctions, and this campaign would push the institutions to boycott any investment in Israel. So this campaign is taking place today in European countries, and it has started to impact the Israeli economy. Here it is also important to say that the European Union has started since the 1st of Jan to implement guidelines which refuse products coming from the occupied Palestinian lands, which are lands of Israel today, and this has pissed Israel so far. And the 28 European states have accepted to abide by these guidelines, and the implementation started in Jan 2014. In case of failure, it is necessary to launch an organized campaign by the Palestinian Authority, and this campaign should be supported by the Arab states so that this campaign would be successful and exert the necessary international pressure on Israel. There is another style, and I hope that it will be well understood. The Palestinian Authority can also resort to the peaceful resistance in a similar way to the resistance of Gandhi, who was able to push the United Kingdom to withdraw from the Indian lands, and this can happen through the boycott of Israeli products and through a civil disobedience. All of this is difficult. However, these options can be fruitful and can exert the necessary pressure on the Israeli government and people so that Israel decides to refrain from becoming an apartheid state. And there are many articles written in the international press about this. Now I would like to move to the issue of Syria. And this is another serious challenge facing the Arab world. And the complications of this crisis internally and externally have been growing in importance and have been obstructing the peace settlement of the Syrian crisis. We are looking for a Syrian solution which meets the aspirations of the Syrian people. This catastrophe theoretically can be analyzed from four angles. The first angle is how would this catastrophe end, and the answer can come for me from a peaceful settlement, and this has been recommended by the Arab states who talked about a peaceful settlement rather than a military settlement of the Syrian crisis. And according to the final statement of the first Geneva conference, and this was also reiterated by the second Geneva conference, it is necessary to form a transitional authority with the agreement of the opposition and the government. Unfortunately, the conference which was held on the 22nd of January was not successful, despite all the tireless efforts deployed by the joint UN and Arab League state envoy Al-Akhdar Al-Ibrahimi. He's a very wise person, and he has a long-standing experience in dealing with Syria, because as you know, He was supported by the Arab states, and he was behind the Ta'if agreement, and he is aware of the Syrian mentality. He exerted tireless efforts for a year and a half, and despite all of this, a solution was not reached. And I doubt that a similar conference would be held again. In a recent phone call with Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the UN, he said that he doesn't have a plan B. Currently, the Syrian crisis is being discussed with the permanent members. There are consultations between the United States and Russia, but so far we do not have ideas on how to find an exit to this crisis. There should be a resolution from the Security Council to put an end to the bloodshed in Syria. The people who are being killed today in Syria from both parties is something to be regretted. I talked in an interview in April 2012 on the importance to put an end to conflict, and I said that every conflict in the world, every combat, when the number of deaths increases, a ceasefire should be announced, and this has not been does not apply today to the Syrian crisis after 2 years of conflict. In January 2012, 22nd of January 2012, I said that 2 years have passed and the United Nations has not done anything in what concerns the Syrian crisis. The ceasefire resolutions can be issued once, twice, or 3 times, and they can be implemented at the end of the day. However, this ceasefire was not between the Arab states and Israel was not implemented immediately. In Syria, every day hundreds of people are dying and there is no ceasefire. Why? Because there is 1 or 2 permanent members of the Security Council who are refusing to declare a ceasefire, and I think that this is one of the most important challenges that the contemporary world is facing today. The third angle is related to the necessity to put an end or to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people as soon as possible. And this can be done through the immediate implementation of the Security Council Resolution 2139 adopted last week. I asked the Secretary General of the United Nations to send a report to the Security Council within 30 days. This should happen within 48 hours. I cannot understand why they have decided to extend this period to 3 to 5 days. Saudi Arabia and some Arab states would discuss this, as I understood, in the Security Council in the coming days. The fourth angle is the following. Based on the destruction which took place in Syria, and I would like to say that Damascus is one of the most ancient cities in the world, and Syria has a long-standing history. However, the destruction is very big, and the question is who would undertake the reconstruction of Syria and how much would this reconstruction cost? I think that we should think about these questions. I have attended a conference in Marrakesh in Morocco in 2012, and the focus was on the day after. What will happen in the future? I think that there are many thoughts about that, but the international community should act swiftly in order to prepare for the reconstruction of Syria. Yesterday, I took part in a conference about readiness and preparedness in the Arab world. And on behalf of the League of Arab States, I called for the establishment of a readiness and preparedness network in the Arab world. And I hope that the issue of Syria would be discussed from this angle. One of the most important lessons to be drawn from the Syrian conflict is to seek a peaceful settlement rather than a military settlement. The solution should be a political one, and the Arab states are seeking to contribute to this solution. But at the end of the day, the Syrians are the ones who would decide their future. In the Geneva conference, and after the preliminary conference to which 40 states took part in Montreux, there were two meetings in Geneva. As I said, Al-Akhdar al-Ibrahimi played a very important role. However, the government wanted to discuss the anti-terrorism strategy rather than the comprehensive Syrian crisis and the necessity to move to a transitional authority or entity. However, of course, the issue of anti-terrorism is very important, and it has been a discussed matter in the United Nations since the 1970s. And the United Nations agreed that the root causes of terrorism should be discussed. Without this, this phenomenon would last. And the League of Arab States have said repeatedly that the responsibility of the Syrian crisis is the responsibility of the United Nations Security Council and the 5 permanent states. What is important today is to alleviate the human suffering and to put an end to the blockade of the civilians. In Geneva, we said that the blockade of civilians, even during wars, is considered a war crime. Even during wars, the civilians shouldn't be besieged, and what is happening in Syria cannot be accepted by the human conscience. Anyhow, the resolution which was adopted holds an important message to the Syrian government. Russia and China did not raise the veto, and this resolution would allow to open humanitarian channels in order to, or corridors in order to transfer the humanitarian assistance to the Syrian people. So this is the situation in Syria today. However, there are other challenges at both the internal and the regional levels faced by the Arab states, and these should be taken into consideration. These challenges are related to the distinguished geographical location of the Arab states. These Arab states are surrounded by technologically advanced countries, and these countries have ambitions and greeds, and by these neighboring countries I mean Turkey, Iran, and Israel, which has a very big nuclear arsenal. And this is why the Arab states should always focus on the ambitions and greeds of these neighboring countries, which have different purposes and objectives. This leads me to say that the nature of challenges impose on the Arab states the necessity to work jointly and to develop the structure of the League of Arab States. There are also other challenges facing the Arab states. These challenges are political, economic, and social.
There are many challenges. Some of them are based on the incapacity to adopt a common policy to deal with economy, politics, and social matters that are interconnected, such as lack of good education and also economic problems such as unemployment, and all are things that needs to be dealt with in the context of the complementarity between the Arab states. As we know from all of our experiences and the international experiences, cooperation, complementarity is the best way to deal with these challenges that affect our security and benefits. On the other level, we need to work on establishing a security network in the Arab states, especially that this region witnessed a lot of developments. And we need to focus on using our expertise and using them in order to reconstruct our institutions and monitor the elections in order to improve their credibility. And here we need to speak about the importance of the lessons learned from the past, and and also to work on establishing national dialogues that is wide and encompasses all the political and other powers in the region. We know that the elections are not only a date, and it is not only based on the polls where the victorious can have full powers without monitoring. We need to change. We know, of course, that every society has its characteristics, but all the societies share certain similarities. We have rules and standards that are accepted everywhere concerning the creation of a democratic country, especially the separation of powers and the dialogue culture, and not to consider ourselves that we have in our power the whole truth. We need to work also on creating a national economy that is balanced and to have social guarantees that are necessary for every society in order to preserve its security and stability. Facing these challenges needs to be based on the complementarity and cooperation, because we need to take into consideration the experiences of countries that witnessed this transition, such as the countries that were under the USSR. So we need to have a new consciousness philosophy. That's why the Arab countries and the whole world is facing challenges, special kind of challenges, pertaining to preserving the basic components of life on this planet, such as the environment. And this is a very important matter. And when the Earth Conference was held in Rio, and after 20 years it was again held in Rio, we focused on this very important subject, because we need to deploy all the efforts in order to preserve our environment. Also, we need to create or to find new renewable energy sources. Our Arab countries have natural resources, and if the Arab countries cooperate in a very effective way and to create new projects in energy, this will allow us to preserve our resources for the coming generations. Now I would like to talk or to raise certain issues or certain ways to deal with these challenges. Before speaking about how we can deal effectively and efficiently with these challenges faced by our Arab region, I would like to give you certain remarks about the new international pact, and especially the collective security system that is obstructed by the veto right. The Charter stipulates clearly that there should be equality between countries in rights and responsibilities. However, the drafting of this charter, as it was in 45, allowed there to be a certain gap that became deeper and deeper with the use of the veto. This gap was utilized by the 5 member states of the Security Council, and we know that any of these countries can obstruct the adoption of any resolution, such as the US is doing to protect Israel, and such as the behavior of Russia in protection of the countries where it has influence. So, in the 1950s, we had a certain partial solution. This resolution, of course, at the end of the day, it was just a recommendation. It is not binding. And despite all of this, the resolutions adopted in this framework are considered to be recommendations. But I would like to remind you that Israel withdrew from Sinai in 1965 by a resolution from the General Assembly and not the Security Council, because this resolution was supported by the US and by Russia. So when these countries are in disagreement, the resolutions tend not to be implemented. So I will be brief because I spoke way too much. I would like to say that trying to control the use of the veto right is very important. And I spoke and wrote a lot about this. And I proposed reconsidering 3 measures in order for the decision-making to be done far from the influence of the veto right. First, the measures having a certain humanitarian aspect, such as putting an end to atrocities, implementing the 4 Geneva Conventions, and allowing humanitarian relief to civilians. Second, taking special measures to give the UN Security Council information in order to be able to do its responsibilities. And 3, should be related to the use of mass destruction weapons, which means if a certain country is a threat to or is threatening another country by using the mass destruction weapons, here the UN Security Council needs to face the threatening country and takes a resolution prohibiting these countries from using such a weapon. And if we adopt measures to the use of the veto right, maybe only then we will have a collective security system that can be based on all of this. Now I would like to talk about something a little bit different, which is the role that can be played by the Arab League in facing the challenges. The developments faced lately by the Arab world placed the Arab League General Secretariat in a certain position to reconsider its ability to be up to its responsibilities, and especially its historical responsibilities, to find answers to such questions without sugarcoating. I would like to confess that we fall short many times of our responsibilities, and we have rightful ambitions to play a better role. But when we talk about this matter, I need to speak and to find what are the tools, what are the ways that can be used by the Arab League in order to achieve these ambitions. I am sure that many of you know that the Arab League Charter was drafted in August 1944, before a year of the inauguration of the UN. So back then we used to or we drafted it based on the necessities that were back then. We had the first the World War One, and situation was different than it is today. So my question is now: can you drive a car made in 1944 to drive it in 2013? This is impossible. The Arab League does not have in its hands many tools. We are facing a very important problem. When the Ministerial Council asked to send observers to Syria in 2011, we weren't prepared for that. We don't have any experience in this regard. We used the expertise of the EU, and they said that we need between 4 and 6 weeks to do so. However, we sent our observers led by Sudan. Before that, it was a unique experience. Within 24 hours, we were established, and a crisis room also was established after that. And now we are trying to develop our Arab League in order to have these mechanisms. The African Security Council was able to adopt such mechanisms, whereas we were not able to do so far. And I hope that we would be able to adopt such mechanisms. However, we need to be aware and to understand that there's a huge gap between what was achieved and the aspiration of the Arab people. There are a lot of distance between what we want and what we have, the laws that we have and what we implement. So what the Arab people are seeing today is that there are things that are obstructing our work. So we cannot, the Arab regular person looks at the institutions, at the reports of the Arab League, and sees no implication whatsoever on his daily life. Where is the Arab cooperative work? Sometimes the Arab states agree on a certain matter, and sometimes they disagree. Where is our defense or joint defense mechanism? If we are invaded, if we are occupied, how do we face that? Why weren't we able to achieve any development on the Palestinian crisis level? Where are the voices of our people? Where is the criminal or the Arab Justice Court? What is it doing? Is the Arab ordinary citizen being able to travel from an Arab country to another Arab country freely? Is there a free flow of trade, of products, of services? Do we have a unified cultural work or a complementary cultural work? This is what I was talking about before coming here. Do we have institutions for scientific research that are common between Arab states? Do we have big education institutions that are common? And what are the steps that were taken in order to achieve our unity? All of these questions and many more we need to raise, and we need to face in order to reinforce our future, the future of our collaborative Arab action. And here I am very sincere. I tell you, we need to stop and to look at what we have in terms of mechanisms and tools, and how can we move from the first generation to the third generation of international institutions, because there are a lot of concepts and mechanisms that were created and developed with the creation of the United Nations. Therefore, we need to be up to this level and to develop ourselves in order to do so. On the other hand, there is what can be called the culture of not abiding but by the agreements of the Arab League. So here we need to stop and we need to think about that. We have agreements that were adopted and are not being implemented. We have resolutions that are not being abided by. We need to move forward. And we need to try and improve our performance. Always develop ourselves and improve our performance. This is a continuous process. It is not a one step. It's an ongoing process. We cannot do it with one step. We need to continue developing ourselves and our performance, and we need to take a deeper look about the differences between the mechanism and tools that were used when the Arab League was created and between the current situation, the world today, because today we have new ideas, new concepts, new issues that were not there when the Arab League was created in 1944. So there are NGOs and other institutions who are trying to participate in the government and management of our society. So the citizen is not anymore just a single person who is isolated. Nowhere in the world he is like that. He has the will and he wants to participate in its society and in the world without abiding by the borders. So now the values of freedom, of dignity, and of social equality, they are demands that the Arab person will never accept not to have. And there are also many things that are contradictory to the developments of this of the current times, of this era. So the Arab League and the political, economic institutions in general are hindered by these tools, outdated tools. So we need to develop ourselves in order to be able to face these changes. So the revolutions in some Arab countries were a test to the efficiency and effectivity of our Arab League. And since our objectives in the Arab League is to look in the general situation of the Arab countries, this mission was not given a great importance in our efforts because it collides with our principles of having our independence and not interfering with the issues of one another. We are capable if we have the vision, if we have the will, and if we work on creating our policies and activating our agreements, we can achieve a lot. Such was achieved in the EU and many other unions, such as the African Union, and we can implement our security tools. And I will propose a lot of these issues in Kuwait at the end of the coming month in the Arab League Summit, and I hope the Arab leaders will agree to that. We want to participate in the creation of a better future for our societies, for our countries, for our region, in laying the foundations of our cooperation between the Arab states, because our success in this regard will lead the Arab states to become a great tool in building a better future, more just one, more secure one. And thank you very much.
We would like to thank His Excellency Dr. Nabil Elaraby for this valuable lecture, during which he tackled many topics. You started, Your Excellency, with the international order and you tackled the challenges facing the Arab region and the world. You talked about the importance of having a collaborative work in the Arab region. You were also honest about the presence of gaps in in the joint Arab work. And you also said that there were tools which were appropriate for the previous era and which are no longer useful nowadays. You talked about the necessity to move from the first to the second, third, and fourth generation of international institutions. You also said that these ideas would be suggested during the next summit of the League of Arab States, which will be held in the Kuwait. Now I would like to open the floor for questions and answers. Doctor, as you can see, you are the first one to raise your hand. I'll give the floor to Mr. Jassim, and then I'll move to you, Doctor. Dr. Jassim. Could you please introduce yourself, Jassim Al-Mannai? I would like to start by welcoming His Excellency, the Secretary General. This is a very important opportunity for all of us to attend this lecture and listen to the ideas of His Excellency. I sympathize a lot with what was said by His Excellency about the Arab order and the necessity to introduce changes and amendments to this order. I think that these are wishes, and all of us wish that the international order would become more just for everyone. Practically, I think that what we can do is very modest, and we cannot do a lot in the restructuring of the international order. What is more important or practical is to look into the joint collaborative work in the Arab region. I think that this concerns us directly, and if we want to improve our situation, we should start by reforming our internal structure. I would like to start with the questions related to the collaborative Arab work. We have heard that many decisions were taken but are not implemented today. The Secretary General said that today. I think that there is a series of decisions which were taken but which are not implemented today. This undermines the credibility of the Arab work and further convinces the Arab people about the importance of the League of Arab States. The League of Arab States sought to improve its credibility in the Arab region, and it had the intention to introduce the necessary reforms to its structures so it can recover the trust and confidence of the people and the belief in the fact that the League of Arab States represents the mechanism guaranteeing the interests of the Arab people. Unfortunately, and despite the reform efforts, a little bit has been achieved only, or a little has been achieved so far. I think that we have other phenomena from outside the Arab League that are affecting its work. First, we have the Council of the Central Arab Banks governors. this council issues decisions, and these decisions are usually implemented. Lately, a council for finance ministers, Arab finance ministers, was formed. Why? I think that there should be reasons behind that, and the reason is maybe to have institutions working outside the umbrella of the League of Arab States. However, today, the developments in the Arab region are very serious, and one would expect that the Arab League would play an important role amid these challenges. What we can see is foreign institutions intervening to solve our own problems. And I think that the role of the League of Arab States is today very modest. The European Union sends Catherine Ashton to the Arab world to solve our problems. And I think that their role in our issues has grown greater than our role and greater than the role of Arab institutions. We can give the example of Syria, of Lebanon, of many other Arab countries. Even the issue of the maritime security in Egypt and the necessity to build a dam in Ethiopia is also a matter in which the League of Arab States is not being involved enough. I think maybe there are secret negotiations that I haven't heard of, but I haven't noticed an important role of the League of Arab States in Egypt in order to avoid this security threat facing Egypt. I think that there are many legitimate questions which can be asked by the Arab people, as His Excellency said. And I think that it is high time that we look into our challenges and our own issues, especially taking into account what's happening in the Arab region, because without a serious collaborative work with a palpable impact, we cannot do a lot. Of course, today there are many international gatherings which were able to achieve results on the ground, such as the African Union, for example. The Africans were able to establish an effective system which has been fruitful so far. We hope to have this in the Arab region, and thank you. First, I would like to thank the doctor. And in order to answer the points you have raised, I need maybe 3 other lectures. But allow me to start as follows. The question, what is our impact in changing the international, what is our impact, our role in changing the international order? I think that we should be ashamed to say that our role is very limited in changing the international order. I said that at the beginning of my lecture. I talked about the characteristics of this international order and the failed security system or order. I talked about the gap between the laws and their implementation, and also the weakness of international gatherings or groups. And I talked about the role of the non-aligned movement. I talked about the role of this strong role of this movement, which was able to introduce changes on the ground. I talked about my work in the Egyptian delegation in the UN in 1966. At that time, there was a lack of a political decision. And thanks to the aligned movement, positive results were achieved on the ground. I think that today we are going through a similar hard period. The collaborative work system should be reconsidered, and during the first ministerial meeting in September 2011, I asked the ministers to allow me to form a reform committee. They all accepted, and this committee was formed and was presided over by my friend Al-Akhdar Al-Ibrahimi. This committee comprised members from the different Arab countries. A meeting was held in Oman and another one in Tunisia. A report was reached, and it was submitted to the Commission. You talked about the importance of reform, and this point was adopted by the Arab leaders, and we hope that reform would continue to be implemented in the Arab region. I said that a car made in 1944 is no longer a useful car today. I would like to mention another point. The League of Arab States is working under the umbrella of the United Nations Charter, and under the Chapter 8 of the Charter. This is why it was hard for us to solve the Syrian crisis, and this is why this crisis was looked into by the United Nations. We have also Article 9, which allows the countries to sign agreements between each other. We have an agreement, for example, which has led to the formation of the GCC and the Union of the Maghreb region. I think that these agreements are important at some point. Iraq, Egypt, Jordan, and Yemen formed a joint council. I think that all these institutions strengthen the mother organization. It is also necessary to consider the multiple risks surrounding us. The neighboring countries are strong countries. You talked about the maritime security issue of Egypt. Two Arab countries haven't requested anything from the League of Arab States, and I think that here we cannot play a role because there are many sensitive issues between the African countries, such as Uganda, for example, and other African countries which have some concerns related to dealing with the League of Arab States. What we can do is to enhance joint cooperation, and I think that we should focus on this further and to form additional financial and economic groups. There are many councils working under the umbrella of the League of Arab States. For example, the Arab Justice Council and the Council of Arab Finance Ministers. I think that all of this strengthens the work of the League of Arab States.
In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, I am from the Kuwait University. We would like to thank the ECSSR for holding these lectures. It is very important. It enriches our dialogue and culture. I am like any guy who feels for anyone who works in the framework of collaborative Arab action, and you are, sir, on the head of this list, and you are now the Secretary General who are criticizing the Arab League, and this is very effective. You are asking questions. However, the success of the international regional institutions stems from the success of the member states. So the success of institutions who are more developed, and I'm here talking about the EU, who was created after the Arab League, was something predictable, whereas our institution is not as developed. However, it was created before that, and I'm here talking about the African Union. So what is the reason behind the lack of development in the institutions of such as the Arab League? Is it the Arab mentality? We understand that the European Union is more developed than us, so therefore they achieve success. But the African regions, they are not as developed as us, and they achieved more success than us. So here we can say that the GCC is more successful because it comprises a fewer number of countries. However, when we are working with large numbers, we do not succeed. Thank you very much, Secretary General, for giving me this opportunity. I would like to thank you, sir, for raising this point, because I am overwhelmed and I think a lot about that. If we take, for example, the European Union, European Union started by being an economic union about the coal and iron, etc. And based on their experiences in life and the experience during the World War II, they started shifting towards a larger union. When they found that the Soviet Union was dismantled, they started to do everything in their power in order to gather the European countries. They were paying them to be with them under the umbrella of one unity, and they had a democratic system for long years. So the adopted rules or laws are implemented immediately. So there's no gap in the European countries between between issuing laws and implementing them. Talking about the African Union, and this is your large question, the African Union, let's say it bluntly, the African states work more seriously than us. I feel so sorry to say that. However, this is the truth. I worked in the UN since 1966 and I saw them working. They are really serious. And I hope that this mentality will be changed in the Arab world. We have huge problems. I don't want any Arab country to think that they stand alone. We are all in the same basket, and we have internal problems. However, we also have external problems. They are common because of the countries surrounding us, such as Iran, Syria, and Turkey. And they have ambitions, and we need to be unified in our positions and work together hand in hand in order to face these challenges. Also, we have a lot of problems facing us in terms of environment, and we need to work together in facing such problems. Our trade zone will start in 2020, and next year we will start with our customs union that will encompass the Arab countries. We need to work on creating institutions that can increase the value of our collective work and existence. For example, they spoke about the creation of a human rights court for the Arab League. Some have concerns about that. However, we need to work together on creating more institutions. We are a lot of proposition. We had a proposition last year about bridging the food gap. We need to focus on this issue, and we need to launch collective projects to face this problem. And I proposed a project about renewable energy. It is abundant in our countries. We have solar energy, we have wind, so we need to present projects that can interest every Arab citizen in order to develop, for example, the scientific research. Some countries have more financial resources, they can do more. However, we need to level up this research in all of our countries. Maybe it will take us time to change our mentality. However, all the Arab countries need to feel our common interest, and we need to know that we are facing challenges that are bigger than us, and we need to find ourselves a position. Thank you, Doctor. At the end of the day, I agree with you. This question, I think about it every day. Go ahead, Doctor.
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, Your Excellency Dr. Nabil Elaraby, thank you so much. I am Dr. Ali Al-Amoudi, a consultant in environment and sustainable development. Dr. Nabil, you tackled many concerns, challenges, and gaps. You also mentioned ambitions. Do you agree with me, Your Excellency, that the future of the collaborative work in the Arab region is not only a political one? You talked about technological and technical challenges, especially in terms of climate change and the international trends. I think that as an Arab system, you should have a clear vision in addition to joint programs. You talked about the future of energy, and here in the United Arab Emirates, we are proud to be a pioneering country in the field of renewable energy, despite the fact that we are one of the biggest oil exporting countries. We are seeking to find alternatives for fossil fuels and to focus on renewable energy. There are many challenges. These challenges are not only political. Many Arab people have been involved in politics for a long time. I think let's leave politics for politicians and let's focus further on sustainable development challenges. This is why, briefly, I hope that the future of the joint Arab work would focus on renewable energy, alternative energy sources, and I think that God has bestowed on us the energy of sun, of wind, and I think that today it is necessary to highlight what was said by our colleagues. They said that water is one of the most important resources, and the potential wars are water wars. This is why we should have a joint plan which allows us to complement, to have a complementarity in our work. I think that we should focus more on sustainable development rather than politics. Thank you. Allow me to thank you for your comments because sustainable development is the future, and natural resources represent a very important aspect of the future of many countries. This is why during the ministerial meeting, I talked about giant projects involving many Arab countries. I think that the proposal has been studied and a report will be submitted to the Ministerial Council during the Arab League Summit. It's the project of renewable energy, and I am sure and proud that the United Arab Emirates is a great contributor in this field. Indeed, other Arab countries should also be involved in renewable energy projects. We have wind energy, solar energy. 4 or 5 years ago, I read an article about a project in Europe, a project which is being studied by European countries. An Egyptian engineer was working on this project, which focuses on renewable energy, mainly on wind. And I think that Arab countries can export renewable energy to Western countries. I think that this project is difficult and costly, but we should start to think about it seriously. There are other projects on environment protection. these projects are important. There are also projects about rivers. I think that there is a limited number of rivers in the Arab region in Iraq, between Egypt and Sudan. We have also the Nile, which is between Egypt and the African countries. I think that we should maintain our acquired rights. And here I would like to go back to the characteristics of the international order today. There is a great gap between the laws and the implementation. Unfortunately, this is the reality today. Thank you.
Please be brief. Please introduce yourself. Dr. Salat Ladli. Where are you from, doctor? I am Egyptian. Where do you work? I work here. In which institution? I work in transportation department. In the Department of Transportation. So my remark for the doctor is that you spoke about the success of the EU and the African Union and the GCC. This will be my starting point. However, we have certain variables. Sometimes we have something called dummy variables, because I think that the success of the European Union is not based on what we were talking about. I think that this is due to the unconsciousness that was created by the world wars. So they feel that they have a collective cooperation because they witnessed and they faced a lot together. Even this is applicable to the EU and the African Union. However, in the GCC, I think that their common culture is one of the main pillars or the dummy variables. It's the scientific word for it. So I think if we prepare studies about that, we will find that the culture is the main pillar. However, the economic characteristics and social characteristics are secondary. The main hindrances are the existence of the Arab person, because our Arab culture need to have strong and light forces. However, what happened in the Arab world ever since the 50s or the occupation was flattening our thinking. And I'll give you an example from Egypt, and I think that, for example, the production of books was by personal efforts, so the dummy variable in this regard can impact later on the collective Arab work. So we need soft power that impact our political leaders. So we feel that when there's a problem, they go to other countries and they try to face the problem in other countries. However, we have cultured people. They need to be a soft power, not deal with the issues by screaming. And I think that the cultural development of the Arab person is one of the most important issues. It is much more important than the economic and social developments. So if I am conscious, and I know that I am living in X country, if I feel that I have interest in a country, why I will be supportive and I will be a soft power. Thank you. I agree with what Dr. Salah said. The Arab person, the African person, the European person is very important. However, we need to gather these people. And your other point, and you're right with that, it is the culture and the scientific research. Sometimes we read in the newspaper that our scientific research work is of a certain percentage. However, in other countries, we find a larger percentage of such studies. So nowadays, this is related, this is up to each country. However, the Arab League, they can issue resolutions. I'll give you an example. I thought about that, and many others thought before me and thought with me. We thought about holding a cultural summit, and after I spoke to other people, we will be holding a meeting in Cairo soon enough to talk about that. We will hold, for example, cultural summit. Most of the leaders won't be attending. To be honest, they are preoccupied. Our problem today is how can we, here we're talking about countries. Of course, the United Nations are countries. They are not individuals or institutions. How can we gather countries on some issues? I spoke about renewable energy. This is of high importance, and most leaders will be interested and will think about it. However, how can we build the individual? This will take a lot of time. Thank you.
نعم الأخ تفضل
سامر لواء الأمانة.
لواء الأمانة from Now TV in Dubai. Thank you, Your Excellency. You talked about the humanitarian crisis in Syria. What are the real solutions today amid the displacement of 6 million Syrians in the neighboring countries? We are talking about an Arab collaborative work. The League of Arab States has directed its efforts to the United Nations, and we can see that Russia, with its veto, is always hindering the humanitarian efforts to alleviate the impact of this crisis. We are also witnessing the suffering of the Syrian refugees in the neighboring Arab countries who are still unable to move from one country to another, and who are still not authorized to enter other Arab countries. At the humanitarian levels, of course, the United Arab Emirates has exerted great efforts and has sent 340 containers to Tartus port. I think that the humanitarian situation in Syria is unfortunate. It's an attempt to stem hunger in Syria. We have other phenomena in Syria, such as Daesh and other movements in Syria. Syria was never a hub for such movements. A last point, the intervention of Iran and Hezbollah in Syria. What are the solutions that should be considered today, especially that Hezbollah was considered a supportive organization for terrorism by Bahrain? What are the solutions that we can provide today as Arab states to the Syrian crisis? I am sorry to say the following, but I have noticed that you were talking about solutions and solutions. There are no solutions today. Of course, there are efforts and endeavors, but the Syrian crisis today is the biggest catastrophe of this area. Unfortunately, the solutions about which you are talking are not there. The only solution that I have suggested is to overcome the Russian veto. Unfortunately, the Arab states today cannot do anything, and what Russia is doing today is leading to negative relations with the Arab world, or to the degradation of relations with the Arab world. In what concerns the Syrian people and refugees, I think that this is something that should awaken the international conscience. There are 6 million displaced people in Syria. I think that the situation of the displaced is even worse than the situation of the refugees. In 2006, we received individuals from Syria who said that in their villages they cannot find food, education, and water. And at that time we held a meeting with Al-Akhdar Al-Ibrahimi, and we had people protesting in front of the Arab League headquarters and asking us, what are you doing? What can we say? Amid such situation in Syria, the only solution is to reach a peaceful settlement, which leads to the formation of a transitional body comprising both the opposition and the government. This is the only way out of the Syrian crisis. What is called terrorism today is the fruit of this military conflict in Syria. Before the Second World War in 1936 and 1939, there were combatants from different countries around the world. This applies to many conflicts. When there is a military combat, a military conflict, there are always people who are ready to go and get involved in this conflict. The most important step to be taken is to address the root causes of this conflict and to meet the expectations or the ambitions of the Syrian people. Personally, I think that what happening in Syria is similar to what happened in Egypt and Tunisia. The people want to get rid of a system or regime that has been in place for a very long time. The people are looking forward for a democratic regime, for social justice, and for equality. How can we reach the solution you are talking about? I think that this is the biggest problem. The Russian position is unacceptable today. I hope that the last vote would be a sign of change. However, the international community should continue to exert real pressure in order to change the situation in Syria. Unfortunately, the League of Arab States cannot do anything in this regard. Of course, we support the ambitions of the Syrian people, but we do not have means to exert pressure on Russia. I think that after submitting the Syrian crisis file to the United Nations, there are no dialogue anymore in the League of Arab States about Syria.
So the last question, please present yourself. In the name of God, Ahmad Suwaidi from the Ministry of Interior. My question is, what are the challenges that can face the Arab League in having one single voice for the Arab countries, especially that we are witnessing a certain difference between the positions of some countries? Some are supporting, for example, in Syria, the government, and others are supporting the opposition. And this is reflected in the decisions of some countries. What are the challenges that you are facing in terms of gathering Arabs on one dialogue table and trying to avoid sectarian schism? I think that differences in Syria and the conflict is a sectarian conflict in Syria. It is more sectarian than political or keeping and preserving the government. Thank you very much. I disagree with you. because the Syrian conflict is political. It is due to a large number of people in Syria wanting change, and this is legitimate. However, the sectarian issues were raised later on. And I'll give you an example. In July 2012, we gathered under the umbrella of the Arab League. We were 230, or we gathered 230 Syrians from all sects, Sunni, Shia, Alawite, Kurds, all of them are Syrians, and they spoke and they talked for 2 days. At the end of the 2 days, they reached an agreement on 2 documents. The first one was called the Pact, and it included rules that need to be in the Syrian system, and another document on how to reach that. So this is a clear indicator that all sects of the Syrian people want to reach a solution that can give Syria back the position it used to have. I was raised to the story saying that Syria is the heart of the Arab world. Unfortunately, the current situation is way too different, and I hope that the suffering of the Syrian people will lead to a change in this situation. You said later on, the day after, maybe there will be sectarian problems. We hope that this will not happen. But I disagree with you. It is not a sectarian conflict. It is a political one. It is similar to what happened in Tunisia and Libya and Egypt and Yemen. Of course, in Yemen it's still ongoing, but the conflict in principle was a conflict on how to be able to transit from one situation to another, and for the country to be for every citizen and to meet the aspiration of every citizen. Thank you very much. So, Doctor, in the conclusion of this lecture, we would like to thank Dr. Nabil Elaraby, the Arab League Secretary General, for the very important and precious ideas that he presented us. We would like to thank you all for your effective for your participation in the discussion, and we would like to welcome you to participate in the coming session that will be concerning the economies of the clean energy. It will be on the 5th of March 2014. I would like to invite you to dinner in our new venue. Please follow the instructions and or ask for the at the information desk. Thank you very much. I wish you a pleasant evening.